Welcome to the Iowa Ag Podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger, here at the Jethro's Barbecue Studio. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about meat production and eating today on the Iowa Ag Podcast. And to do so, we have with us right here Tucker Maxwell. Tucker, thank you so much for joining us on the Iowa Ag Podcast. You are the owner of Maxwell Custom Beef right here, actually in the East Village where we record the Iowa Ag Podcast. So did you walk over here?
No, I drove. I hopped in my car. If it was summer or spring, I definitely would have, But no, I definitely appreciate you having me. And what a cool location for a locker, right? Growing up in a small town, there's so much around here. So if I want to jump out of the office or any place for work, or for lunch, just head down here.
Right. And what's especially cool about being in downtown Des Moines as well is you guys are actually kind of in a historic site as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we're a historical building. In 2028, the building will turn 100 years old.
Holy cow, that is quite a season. What was it originally?
It's always been a meat packing plant.
Always been a meat packing plant.
Yeah, the train tracks used to drive right by there. So 1869, the family that I took over from had always had a meat packing plant there.
Wow.
And so they were 5 generations in, and definitely lucky to kind of stumble upon this. And
so tell us about Maxwell Custom Beef then. What made you kind of come up with this idea and start rolling out as a business opportunity? Just give us a little background about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was 13 or 14, started working at Gowie's Locker in Maxwell. My great uncle had started that. And then one of my role models, Mike Adams, he was the owner. And so little middle school kid, how do you want one of those kids just running around, right?
Right.
And so I started helping them with deer, washing barrels, things like that. And so kind of as time had passed, I was actually living in Florida. I came back, just some family stuff, and brought some beef down there for my dad. And he was like, hey, this place for sale, right? And so I had been looking for my own thing, and it's like, well, I never really thought that I would be getting back into the custom butcher industry, but here we are, so...
You said getting into your own thing. I know you have a bit of a background in agriculture in general, family farm. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. So, 7th generation farm.
Wow.
In Maxwell. Yeah. They're, my dad and my uncle, they're big into row crop.
Is it named after you guys?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it really?
It is.
I thought that was a joke.
No, like a bunch of generations down the line, great uncle decided, wanted to be closer to the train tracks, so it went from Iowa Center to Maxwell. But yeah, Maxwell's a great little town, if you blink, you might miss it, to be honest, but you definitely want to keep your eyes open.
That's cool, though.
I was definitely glad to grow up there. And they have some confinement hogs there. Just got back into the cattle industry. I started showing cow-calf pairs when I was in middle school too, and then kind of started from there. And then my dad just kind of kept it going when I went to college. So
right, you said you wanted to do your own thing when working with Maxwell Custom Beef here in Des Moines, but back in Maxwell, the town where you grew up in, your family did some farming. I know it's very difficult to kind of continue in agriculture simply because of not only just the cost of being a farmer, but also the difficulty in starting up as a farmer in, a market that has a lot of folks already in it.
Certainly. And that's kind of where I went the custom butcher route, or the beef processing, is I knew a little bit about it. It's an industry that's definitely older, so there's a lot, unfortunately, of lockers that are just kind of phasing out, whether it's burnt out, no one wants to take it over. And really, I liked being around the farm, but I wanted to do something that was kind of my own. And I don't really know if there's a place for that on the farm. My dad had kind of cut his niche. My uncle had kind of cut his. And it's kind of branching out. I really never had a passion for the row crop side of it. The cattle I liked just because it was bonding time with my dad.
Right.
So, it's how could we kind of help him expand? And so then when he was like, hey, this place for sale, like the light bulb went off. It's like, okay, maybe this is indirect way to kind of work with him. And so it's been awesome. He's brought some beef down, and then just the producers around central Iowa that have met through this, kind of not the same bond that I have with my dad, but like definitely connect with him a lot better because I see like a lot of the values that he has and a lot of the way these, the older generation raises their cattle. And then it's nice to see some of like my generation starting to bring cattle in too. So
I love the direct connection to the family farm when it comes to that, and especially as a way to maintain community, which, being in agriculture, you kind of realize how tight-knit the community is there. So just tell me about the custom beef operation. How does that function in modern day Iowa?
Yeah, it's definitely something that's making a comeback. More people want to know where their meat's coming from. And so custom, in my mind, it essentially eliminates the middleman because there still needs to be 2 transactions for it to be custom beef. Like I only get the transaction for the processing or the service, and then the customer still pays the producer direct. And so I think that it's really neat. There's a little bit less like government hoops to jump through. Just in terms of like day-to-day paperwork, we still fill out the same stuff, but it's not like quite as strict, which is nice. But really it's a way for the consumer to connect directly with the producer. And I think it's cool. Like we have a bunch of producers that'll offer, site visits. So if you want to come see the cattle, how they're fed, where they're raised, you can make that connection. Something you really can't do in like aisles or anything like that at the grocery store. So
absolutely. And cutting out the middleman, are you talking packing plant, grocery store, all of it?
Yeah, I am. I definitely think it's really important, especially like in the news lately. Everybody's all in a tizzy, I guess, about bringing Argentina beef is. Well, the biggest thing is the consumer has the final say in what type of beef they purchase, right? And you want to kind of take that back. You want to give more power to the farmers, let them create their brand, rather than nothing against the big four or anything. They've had a really strong grip on the market for a long time. So it's like, how can you carve out a little niche and then help a lot of farms, make a little bit bigger margins on their stuff, make their product worthwhile. And you don't really see that when you go buy a ribeye or something from the grocery store. But when you open up your freezer and you get out a package of ribeyes, you're like, okay, I know exactly who fed this, exactly how the animal was treated. And so there's a lot more of a connection. And then like the overall quality from that, you would think would be a little bit better. So
I think from what you just described there, we have a situation in hogs where it's mostly vertically integrated in some capacity. Very little is direct market. But when it comes to cattle, it is still mostly free market, but there's the constraint of those major players when it comes to the packers. And so there's been pushes to have value added. There's a new plant that's more like a co-op here in Iowa. And having options like what you're describing is just another avenue where farmers can add a little value to what they do.
Certainly, certainly. And as branding, with social media, branding's starting to be like a huge thing, right?
Right.
And so as people want to get into it, in my generation, it's a little bit of a lower cost, Right now the market's crazy high, but if you were to want to do something like that, this gives people the avenue to create their own brand, create their own labels. If they want to do a little pop-up store, they can. And so that's kind of what I want Maxwell Custom Beef to kind of help facilitate. I want them to sell their cattle. I'll do the processing. Like, I don't want the notoriety. I just want to be an avenue for people to, capitalize on all their hard work. So
when you say that, then because you already mentioned you're working with your dad, it's not exclusive to what your dad produces. Then you're also reaching out and finding other folks who are selling their cattle and even offering them an opportunity to market specifically from their location.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many different ways to feed beef. There's a big wave with grass-fed, non-GMO grain, grass and then grain finished. There's so many different options. And some, genetics, the cattle are built or they're raised to be bigger framed. It's what the packer wanted. And so with that, I want to be able to customize, and I want to have a list of producers that, if they only want to have like a 600-pound finished hanging carcass versus like a 1,200-pound, the steaks might be a little smaller, but it's going to be more affordable, and it's going to tailor towards someone who's not going to have quite as big of an appetite or as big of a family to feed. where, I want to be able to facilitate all of that. So you can customize everything. Why can't you customize your beef order exactly down to how that beef was raised and exactly what it's going to hang and cut out to? I think being able to facilitate that is something we're definitely trying to do.
So you guys go all the way from selling quarter beef or half beef all the way to you're doing packaging yourself in the location that you're talking about here in Des Moines?
Absolutely. We slaughter in-house. We hang for 17 to 21 days. We have a dry age, so it gives the steak a little more flavor, which is nice, and kind of brings out those genetics and the way it was fed. And then, we cut it exactly to the specs. So we have a cut sheet, and, whether you really like roast, ground beef, steaks, we'll pull out all different sorts of steaks for you. And then, we freeze it all up because you're getting hundreds of pounds of meat at once, but we facilitate that and make it as easy as possible.
So if someone was listening to this and hearing what you describe, how would it be different than a non-farmer, a non-person in agriculture? How would this system be different than just a butcher?
Yeah, so usually a butcher's just like, they've always historically been like, okay, I guess like where I worked, it was all bone in. You only had like set amount of cuts. We're trying to facilitate like, do you want roast heavy? Like all the way down to, okay, this is the calf we have available. Well, if it was grain or grass, didn't really matter. Like I want it to be like you can customize the weight it's going to hang at, everything. And then I have a list of producers that want to work with me. And then I can call them and be like, hey, what's your wait list like? Do you have beef ready? I have somebody here I'm going to put you in contact with, and then facilitate it that way. So just really more of like a marketplace for it rather than just a butcher. Like, just really customize the experience, I guess.
I have always been amazed at how folks in the food industry are able to use just about every part of food, animal, what have you. There is maximum efficiency focused on that. And so when you look at the national scene, the export scene, you'll see this push towards things like variety meats, where that's a great export, right? That's a value-added product somewhere else, not in the United States. Are you guys able to do something like that with the variety meats that you guys have, or have you found local opportunities to show off some of the variety meats here in Iowa?
We really can't, just with the custom side. I mean, the beef is owned by the purchaser before it even comes in, so live. So there's some constraints there with how we can sell, those offals or variety meats. It's unfortunate. We do have our dog food license, so that kind of opens up some avenues for us. But, we have to check all those boxes of the owner of that quarter half or whole beef. Like, they have to let us know that, no, they don't want any of those. And so that kind of helps us a little bit. But, once we get state inspected, there's definitely those avenues, at the level that we're at right now. I think that's a little bit later down the line.
A little bit later down the line.
Yeah. No.
Sorry, it was a bit of a tangent. I just popped into my head. And on a similar note, a bit of a tangent, but also something I find a little bit interesting. But when it comes to your guys' system at Maxwell Custom Beef, what is the capacity you're looking at? And do you have a capacity goal that you would like to reach in terms, and this could also be just farms that you're interacting with, and if that's too much of a personal question, you don't have to answer, but I was curious.
No, we're looking to grow. We're looking to like actively grow. We've doubled what we did, and I've only been in it for 8.5 months, right? So it's kind of been a spike. They used to do 45 head a day out of this building. Now they weren't hanging everything, because then this is when grocery stores around here would break down all the beef. So they'd send front and hindquarters places. If we could get to, I have 3 coolers, only 1 in use right now. 1's getting turned on. If we could get to that 40 head a week processed, I think that would be awesome.
That'd be very cool.
Yeah, it would. And I think like it needs to be more than a number though. I think it just needs to be like, how many producers can I help keep going? If I could curve the amount of, kind of get them a premium, but also connect with the consumer and save them a little bit of money. That's like the main goal. I don't really have like a quantity, I guess. Just want people to eat more beef. And so like, I don't know. That's just kind of the goal. I'm kind of laser focused on how can we keep quality the same with keeping the amount of beef run through, keep the guys busy, just keep marketing the word out. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of going with the flow. It's really see what producers need from me and kind of go from there.
You mentioned you are only 8 months into this, and that means my next question might have a different answer than it would for most other folks that deal with beef. And that is, I think back to COVID when there was pretty huge supply chain problems going on and folks had to hold on to their cattle a little bit longer than expected, and so had heavier cows when they went to market. And folks realized at that point that those heavier cows were selling a bit better. They were a bit fatter. They were a bit tastier. And that trend kind of just continued from that point on. And as far as I understand that, when you're looking at some of those cattle that are more fed, that are maybe a little heavier than they were 5-6 years ago, does that impact what you do?
Yeah. So I was the only locker in the state, probably the country, I don't know, but we had a weight limit, right? And so everybody's argument would be, well, you get paid by the pound. My argument to that is I want the consumer to understand, I want it to be fair that it's not the hanging weight you pay for it that you get back. Like there's a cutout percentage, and on those bigger beef, the bones are bigger, the fat cap is inherently going to be bigger. So instead of, cutting out anywhere from 55 to 65%, you're closer to like 45 to 50% on your cutout, especially when you go boneless in your cuts. So it's trying to explain that. I have some producers, I think it's awesome that, they make their margins in that extra couple hundred pounds, but also I want it to be very clear to the customer that you are paying for more waste. And so that's the one thing. I just lifted the weight limit. I need the cattle in. But yeah, I think with how they've been bred, you have to adjust to that. But also with adjusting to that, it definitely takes a little more explaining to the customer in the long run that this is why your cutout is the way it is.
In explaining to the customer, there's also the constant struggle that any business owner has of price to value to what folks are actually wanting. And I go back to when we were talking earlier about the chokehold and kind of that choke point rather of major packing plants. And I think of cattle industry as a whole being a difficult industry simply because of how long it takes and how much investment it takes to put into the cow before it gets to market. And there's so much money that goes into that there are margins that need to be met before someone loses some money on spending 2 years to grow a cow to send to market. How do you balance the fact that some groups like packing plants can just take a loss or go at the thinnest margins possible, but you are trying to not only make a living for yourself, but also give good value to the farmers who are involved with your operation?
Yeah. So I guess if we stick to the heavier carcasses, with that, I guess they're going to grade better too. So you kind of take that into account, just kind of convince them, farmers, some of them take a little while to adjust, especially, and they're inherently the best people in the world. They're super nice. They're super friendly. They don't want to feel like they're screwing anybody over, for lack of a better term. Yeah. And so with that, it's convincing them hey, you have a really good product here. Instead of charging less than the market right now, why don't we convince your customers that it is? And even where the market is, I get it, it's expensive, but it's worth it. And so just having those conversations and, easing them into it has been kind of good. And especially my argument is for all these guys saying, well, the market's been at record highs. Why don't I just take them to, Greater Omaha, Iowa Premium? Those are all great places, but it doesn't help me at all. So it's right. Buy into this. So then later on, hopefully we can get you a little bit more than what market is, maybe a quarter, maybe 50 cents, because you're still going to make more and the consumer is going to save. So it's just trying to explain that and get them to buy in, I guess, buying in the vision rather than it's going to take us a couple years to get there.
There's been a bit of a motif, a running theme the last couple questions where you're talking about explaining things to folks, and that involves farmers, but it also involves the customer. As I mentioned before, it is a time where you have to fight against a customer who, will sometimes just buy the cheapest option. And there's going to be premium value. And Americans have proven over the last couple of years they're willing to pay premium for beef. So let's just talk about communication and shift the focus to what it means to be someone in agriculture, in agribusiness, and communicate with folks who don't know anything about agriculture or agribusiness. What's your starting point? I know that's a very broad thing to make. What's your starting point? How do you approach that conversation?
Always try to, I guess, change and be innovative. It's always been the world's going to more hands off. Like, how can we automate? You kind of see that with row crop. I mean, you see it now. And so it's like, how can you automate cattle? There's a lot of like hogs, especially with the vertical integration, have integrated everything. And like, me, it's how can, instead of like, it's spend less hours and be more, I guess, precise and, see what I can do to automate some things, how I can adapt to, I guess, the growing world of AI. It's crazy. It's all over the place. And so it's how can you make things a lot simpler, a lot more direct? Just trying to learn, trying to keep an open mind. Growing up on a farm, it's kind of been our way or the highway. You learn this way, you work harder, you don't let anybody outwork you. Well, that really doesn't work anymore, right? Like, there's technology out there. I'm not saying not to work hard, but it's like, how can we automate things to make everybody's life here easier? And that's where, when you come into the butcher side, especially like a small processing plant, so many of these plants have been retrofitted from, old Chevy garages, Morton buildings. And so it's how can we make this be the easiest and most efficient way while still providing the best product? And with a dwindling field of, potential employees, it's how can we, train these guys? And luckily, all the guys that I got in had some background in this. And to be right honest, they know more than me. So it's like, how can we surround ourselves by people who do that and are always willing to stay open-minded and, adapt? Because the butcher industry from 20 years ago, the average carcass size was 650 pounds, right? And now my average carcass size is north of 800 pounds.
Wow.
So it's like, how do you keep adapting? Because stuff's just going to keep getting bigger and more efficient. So like, we have to adapt to that too. And it's just every single day there's going to be something different and something new. So it's how do you think of that, take it with a grain of salt, and try to implement it into your day-to-day.
Taking that mindset then, if you have a customer comes in or gives a call, they approach you, they say things that are a little, you hear them and you're like, you maybe like move your head a little bit like, huh? What is a way you talk to them in terms of, you may have a misunderstanding of how the cattle industry works, or not to, it's an easy example, not to bash it, but like they talk about, grass-fed cattle, that's way healthier than grain-fed, right? Yep. And someone will approach you, and once again, not going to bash anybody's operation of how they choose to make some money raising cows, but there's going to be a difference there, and there's also going to be misinformation online of what's quote-unquote good, what's quote-unquote bad, and how those approaches are taken other than, how they chose to market their product and grow their product.
Certainly. Well, before I even got into this, all the previous locker owners, I'd kind of pick their brains on. They're like, you're going to be really surprised about how many people don't know about this. And I was like, I grew up with meat in the freezer. And so people come in all the time and they're like, I've never done this before. How does this work? Sometimes, not knocking, if you don't know, you don't know, but like, you can't just get a full thing of ribeyes and New York strips. It's just not possible. There's so many different muscle groups and primals and subprimals. It's just like, how can you explain that and just, okay, this is what you're going to get, explain the cutout percentage. And that's why I want to get as hands off as possible. And I want to just direct connect to the producer, go see him if you want to. I've extended the invite to a couple of people. Definitely lucky that my dad and my uncle bring people in. But there's been a few more. It's just like, if you want their beef, I will facilitate it. I can even go with you if you want. Go see the operation, go learn for yourself, you know. Everybody, I feel like, is hands-on learners. And with technology kind of taking over, everybody learning from a screen, it's still good to go out, smell the manure, as gross as it is, see the beef that you eat, just smell all of that, like the silage. I think it's really good and it's really important. So, like, I guess in a long-winded answer to kind of answer that question, it's be as hands-off as possible, go experience it for yourself. And if you have questions, that's why we're kind of using, like, we're building our AI bot on the website too. Any question that we get from anybody, it immediately gets programmed into our database. So if somebody,
as like a FAQ.
Yeah. So if somebody asks that question on the phone or, you know, in the messenger, it's a really big work in progress. There's a million questions.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But we're trying to stay out in front of that. So then we can answer your question 24/7 and kind of grow and adapt with that. So
it's funny you mention just how little some people may know. And I remember watching a video just maybe a month or two ago, and somebody was making a comment of like, "Oh, I never even thought to think that cows have hooves," and that was just so mind-boggling that, you know, that wouldn't be just common knowledge, and it extends to kind of just that separation of agriculture and normal folks. There's probably plenty of folks who think it's like a video game, right? You have a cow and then, oh, there you have 150 New York strips, right? There's only so many New York strips you can get. There's so many steaks and ribs and all that. All that is, sometimes if you get one cut, you can't have other cuts because it goes over certain, as you mentioned, muscle groups. And so there's this mentality of like, oh, here's a bunch of New York strips in a cow, and the reality of, well, there's only this many, and then there's these other cuts, there's some of these organs, and here's the ground beef that gets from the leftovers.
Certainly. And I try to post on Facebook. My stuff's pretty archaic, and it's just like what I have time to do. But it's trying to, like, a big thing for me is if somebody were to order 90% ground beef off of a high choice or prime marbled beef, well, unfortunately, you know, your cutout's going to be significantly less because to get that, the beef is probably a decent amount bigger. And so you don't get to keep as much of that. And there's over 30% ground from that.
Right.
And so that's like the one thing is, you know, well, where's all my meat at the end of it? And it's explaining that and adjusting our cut sheets to explain that and trying to adapt and trying to walk through. I mean, I've learned so much just from answering questions for these people and how to kind of handle it. And so we try to steer people in the right direction. I mean, so much. The beef loses so much when it dry ages for as long as we dry age.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of water weight.
Exactly. There's so much shrinkage, and you cook out a lot of the fat anyways. So I try to tell people, hey, bang for your buck. Keep the bones in there. There's going to be better flavor. You already pay for them, so you might as well take them home. You know, we're one of the only places that offer 85 versus 90. And, you know, I can kind of see why, but it's not a bad thing. We give people a choice. It's like if you do select a leaner option, then you're going to have more waste. But, you know, for anybody listening that thinks the 90 is the best way, you know, no waste, no taste, right?
Yeah,
yeah. But no, it's pros and cons. The best part about it is you can customize it. It's just trying to, you know, what's the best way that I can spread that to the masses and get people to understand. And, you know, maybe freezer beef's not for everybody either, but the more people it could be for, I think the more people, you know, we could connect local producers, local consumers. It'd be a great relationship there. So
as a farm kid, as someone involved in agribusiness now, and as a direct voice to folks who are not in agriculture, what would you say is the biggest barrier in that urban-rural divide that we see where it is difficult for folks to know where their food comes from?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is coming from someone who I never thought I'd be in this spot. Like, I never really had a passion for anything on the farm, especially row crop-wise. I, like, really didn't want anything to do with it. So I went to business school to not do it. And so the biggest thing is ag's a lot bigger than one would think. There's a million ways to get involved with it. And so, yeah, like definitely ask questions, like in whatever industry, just ask questions, develop relationships. There's so many, like I'm 27. The average age of producers that bring stuff to me is well north of 55. And like, I think I saw the average livestock or the average beef rancher is 60, right? And so there's a lot of shoes to fill, and there's farmers yearning for relationships like that. So it's go ask questions if you're interested, work hard if they give you that opportunity, and they're always going to reward people with hard work. That's the biggest thing. It's definitely an older industry. There's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of potential out there. And so that's the biggest thing. Like the older couple that I took over for, they were just burnt out. They'd been down there for 50 years, right? That's a long time.
Yeah.
And it's just, I asked the right questions, showed up to work, and developed that relationship with them. It's just like anything. People want to listen. People want you to listen, want to know that you care. And it's the biggest thing. There's a ton of room for growth. You just got to be willing to put yourself out there and do it. So
put yourself out there, and that just kind of leads into, as I mentioned at the very start, kind of the community building aspect, right? You have to have relationships with people in order to talk about the things that you know, and in order to have them believe you, when you say things.
No, certainly. And that's the biggest thing. Like, I love getting out to, this was our first summer going through it, but you go to Warren, Jasper, Polk, Story, Marshall, Dallas, all the county fairs around this area. And, you get away from it. It's super important to like still go back there, support the kids that are trying to get into it. And, you see the smile on their face, especially at ribbon auctions or the auction at the end of it when like they get that check and they see that all their hard work is paid off. It's really good to see that. And there's so many people there that are just truly, genuinely good people. And they're way more open to talking to you than you would think. And that's just been, in the short growth spurt that we've had, I would accredit a ton of it to that. It's just, putting myself out there, offering any way I could help. And yeah.
Tucker, before I let you go, you guys are based here in the downtown Des Moines, East Village area, not in Maxwell. It's Maxwell Custom Beef, but it's here in Des Moines. Could you tell me about your operation in terms of how folks might get into contact with you if they were interested in talking selling cows, or if they were talking, I want to buy some beef?
Yeah, definitely want people to eat more beef. So can call or text 515-265-1618. You can swing in. The building's at 410 Southeast 18th Street. We're open Monday to Friday, 7 to 5, Saturday, 7 to noon. We're all over Facebook, Instagram. If you can find my personal Snapchat, it's on my personal Snapchat all the time. I love Snap. Just stop in too if you want. But yeah, definitely call or text the best way. So if you're looking for retail stuff, we have it, but definitely custom beef is the way to go. So
Tucker Maxwell with Maxwell Custom Beef, the owner of Maxwell Custom Beef. Thank you so much for joining us on the Iowa Ag Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you.
Again, this is the Iowa Ag Podcast here at the Jethro's Barbecue Studio. Thanks so much for joining us. And if you're interested in talking more agriculture, I have some other news podcasts I do as well. You can find Farm Here Daily on all of the main platforms, as well as fieldforwardmedia.com. Again, David Geiger here, your host here at the Jethro's Barbecue Studio of the Iowa Ag Podcast. Until next time.